Hello, global gardeners, and welcome to another Monday where we get to just talk gardening for the next 90 minutes. I'll be answering your questions, throwing out a lot of answers, and all of us will be sharing in the experience. You asking your questions and also you giving your answers. So this is such a great community because we have a lot of information between all of us that are watching right now and will watch on replay. I want to go ahead and give a shout out and a congratulations to Lar, who's been accepted into the University of Minnesota Master Gardener Program. Good for you, Lar. That's awesome. I did the Master Gardener Program, as many of you know, back in 2004. And that really got me started in having this passion for gardening. Up to that point, I really liked gardening. But once I got that broad exposure to the whole gardening world in the Master Gardener Program, well, it just took off from there. So I wish you the best, and I have little doubt that you'll have a good time in the Master Gardener Program. One of the best things about a program like a formal education like we have here in the States and Canada with the Master Gardener Program that is directed and taught by university professors, well, you realize that you really don't know anything. So you might think that you are pretty well versed in gardening, and then you go through a program like the Master Gardener Program and you just come to realize how much there is left to learn. And I've been doing this for a few decades now, and every week I know that there is more to learn. And it all started when I was exposed to the Master Gardener Program all those years ago. So it's a good program to get into. Welcome to everybody today, truly from around the world. It's just so awesome to have you all here today. Cover a couple questions that have come up. Frank was wondering about pill bugs, and my kids know them as roly-polies. And I had the same problem. The pill bugs are decimating new seedlings. Had 70 bush beans planted, very good germination, and they took down every one of them as soon as they broke the surface. When I lived in Oklahoma, this is one of the things that went wrong with that garden. The pill bugs decimated it. They did exactly this. They ate all of the seedlings in a single night. And so at that point, I learned a lot more about pill bugs. And what I discovered in my Oklahoma garden was a nest of these pill bugs. And there were thousands of them living in this hole in the earth underneath this pile of leaves and garden debris. And that's the first thing to think about is, where are they nesting? If you've created an environment that is good for the pill bugs or the roly-polies, then they're probably going to move in and they're going to increase their population. So look for those kind of areas in a mulch pile, a leaf pile, an edge of the garden where the mulch is particularly thick, because they're looking for a moist environment, continually moist, dark, and big enough for them to populate. And this raises an important issue if you have an issue with pill bugs. They like moist conditions. So if you're doing a lot of mulching and you're keeping your soil and your garden beds evenly moist, then you're increasing the possibility of the pill bugs or sow bugs or roly-polies, whatever you want to call them. So one solution is to pull back the mulch, particularly in a new area where you have young seedlings. And I do a lot of this where I'll have a very light layer of maybe grass clippings when my seedlings are young, but I don't mulch much when the seedlings are young. It requires more water. You have to do it more often, but you can avoid some problems like this with the pill bug. So peel back the mulch and allow the surface to dry periodically. That will help. You also have to realize what the pill bugs are after. They typically, their primary diet is decomposing material. So they're actually good to have in the garden in a controllable population because they're helping to decompose organic matter. Well, if that food disappears, then they're going to start eating the seedlings. And so that could be an issue. If you don't have a lot of mulch, or if you don't have organic matter worked into the top few inches of your soil, well, now you've depleted their natural food and they're going to turn to your plants and start eating the plants. Diatomaceous earth can work on them, so that's an initial treatment you might consider. And you can do traps. I haven't done it. I understand beard traps can work. I've seen mixed results on that. But the wet rolled up newspaper, like I've talked about with slugs, that can also work for the pill bugs as well, because they're looking for that damp, dark area to crawl into as the sun begins to come up. So there's a couple ideas, Frank. I hope that helps. The nest of the pill bugs, if you can find it, is really a good way. If you can just take away the habitat that they want to live in while they repopulate, that's a good place to start. And then Rachel was asking about the mosquitoes. And it's interesting because I actually had a good week with mosquitoes, so to speak. And so one of the little water features I have in my garden, the pump broke. And so the water started becoming stagnant, and I noticed the mosquito larvae had moved in. And I took some nice film of this. I might use it in a video at some point in the future. But I got my BTI, Bacillus thuringiensis. It's specifically designed for mosquitoes. And so if you have standing water in your garden, you can get the BT, and you just float these little pellets or these little rings that have this bacteria in it. And in the first day, the thousands upon the thousands of larvae that were in this water in my little pond, most of them were dead. And by the second day, everything was dead. So I've talked about BT in the past when you put it on your leaves for the caterpillars, but it can also be very effective for the mosquitoes. And if you really want to get into this, you can start thinking in terms of a bat house. And I do plan on having a bat house at some point, but bats are voracious eaters of mosquitoes. And so if you can entice bats to your area, if you have some native bats, that's one way to deal with the mosquitoes as well. And also just the natural predators that might be out there. Encourage all that variety in your garden, all the different types of plants and trees and bushes and shrubs and grasses. And some of the natural predators will show up and help take care of the insects. But start by kind of like the pill bugs. If you can find the source of this insect pest and then deal with it at the source, you're more likely to reduce your problem. And so with mosquitoes, it's BT. It's a completely natural product, doesn't harm animals at all, and is very effective at getting rid of the mosquitoes. Okay, let's see what else there was. Oh, taco promotions. I wanted to go ahead and point out because I had talked about amaranth. Amaranth is a wonderful plant, another one of those plants you can have in your garden to attract beneficials. It's a beautiful plant. I'm growing a purple amaranth right now. Every part of the plant is edible. And as Taco Promotion says, I tried cooking amaranth root, boiled it in butter and milk and seasoning, and it was very delicious, but also stringy. Perhaps I should boil it in smaller chunks. And so you can eat it like potatoes and boil it down with some butter and some milk. And I haven't actually done it, but thanks for sharing that, because I think it's a nice option. If you've got amaranth, try eating it in different ways. The seeds can be cooked and they'll pop up a little bit and they're kind of crunchy, like a crunchy popcorn. But it's a good plant to have in there. Okay. Bettina, hello to you in Eastern Ontario. Always nice to have the reps, to include Jay from Canada, that we have with us. Andrew Mays is saying, any recommendations on keeping direct sown seeds moist during the day while away at work or for a day or two? It's been tough keeping them moist. So I'll tell you what I'm doing right now. Because I have seeds in a couple of my beds for my fall garden. And so I've talked about using shade cloth for your cool season plants into the summer. So when you're growing your lettuces and your spinach, you cover them with shade cloth to help keep them cool going into the summer. Or during the summer, you put shade cloth over your peppers and your tomatoes when the temperatures get very high so that the flowers don't drop off and you have increased pollination. Later in the season, like right now here in the States in summer when it's hot and I'm starting seeds, I use shade cloth over those newly seeded beds. And so I have my cattle panel hoops, and I took the shade cloth that I was using on those cool season crops, and now that whole bed is covered with shade cloth. And so the one of the last things I did before coming on the show today was to go out and water that newly seeded bed. So I water it in the morning, and then over the weekend I had a day where I was going to be out most of the day. I watered it right before I left. The bed is covered with the shade cloth, and then as soon as I got back, I watered it again. And also, like I just mentioned a few minutes ago, that bed has a very light mulch of dried grass clippings. And so between the dried grass clippings, the early morning watering, the late afternoon watering, and the shade cloth, I'm able to keep my bed pretty moist through the day. And our temperatures right now are 90 to 95 degrees. That's about 32 to 35 Celsius. And it dries out a little bit. That very top layer will get a little bit dry, but not so much that it stops the germination of the seed. So try those couple ideas and see if that helps you out. It's a lot of work, but seriously, last thing I do before I leave is water the bed. First thing I do when I get back is water the bed. And there might be a brief period during the middle of the afternoon where that soil starts to dry out, but I've had success for many years doing that. And I hope it works for you. Isabel, thank you so much for that contribution. No peppers this year, too cold, not even 5 inches high. I wondered if I should start them 1 month earlier next spring. That's a good point. And I'm glad you're asking this question, because I was thinking the same thing this week as well. And so I have a few dozen pepper plants. I'm not exactly sure how many I've got, but I've noticed some of them are doing quite well. My jalapeno peppers are loaded with fruit. They're doing great. And my Anaheim peppers are also doing great. They're growing pretty well. But some of the other chili peppers that I'm growing, my cayenne peppers, for instance, the plants are still pretty small. And my pepperoncini plants are the smallest of all. And so, yes, to your question, start them earlier. And that's my plan next year. Is I recognized, even though I did start my pepper plants about 3 months before my last frost date, and I didn't put them outside for about 3 weeks after my last frost date. So most of my pepper plants were already 3 to 4 months old before I put them outside. They were still relatively small at that point. And so I am going to start my pepper plants, at least some of my pepper plants, earlier next year so that the plants are bigger when I put them outside. And that's what you can do as well, is start them a month earlier, and maybe that'll help. Also check the soil temperature when you put your pepper plants in. And that's one reason why I didn't put my plants in until about 3 weeks after my last frost date, because I was looking for the soil temperature to be 70 degrees, that's 21 Celsius, before I put the pepper plants in. If the soil is cooler than that, you can actually stunt the plant. If you put your plants in when the soil is too cool, particularly the pepper and chili plants, it can stunt the plant and slow their growth. And I think that may have happened because I put my plants right at that temperature. And while some of the others were able to grow pretty well after that, those couple that I mentioned haven't. And so even with the soil temperature at that 70 degree Fahrenheit range, it was still cool enough in the evenings, I think, that my plants didn't do as well. So start earlier, wait later to put them in the ground until the soil is warmer, and hopefully next year you'll have better results. But thank you so much for that super chat. I hope that helps you out. Let's see what else we have popping up. Yankee Sista signed up for channel membership. Thanks so much. It's always good to see you here, and thanks for becoming a channel member on the Gardener Scott channel. We've talked about this before. If you're on a PC, you'll see the blue and white join button below, and if you're on a mobile device, you'll have to go to the Gardener Scott homepage on YouTube and sign up from there, or you can click on the link in the description below all the newer videos, and that'll put you there. And there's some nice perks. I've noticed a lot of the bigger gardening channels are going to channel memberships. It's becoming more and more common now. But I challenge you to check out the different perks that you'll get on the different channels, because I think the perks we offer here on the Gardener Scott channel are better than you'll see in any of the other channels out there. We have at least one extra live stream that's only for the channel members every month. We've got our Facebook group. There's lots of other incidentals that you'll find. But thanks, Yankee Sister, for becoming a member of the channel. I think that's awesome. Thanks so much. Okay, let's see what else we have pop up. It's always nice to have you here. I do want to talk a little bit about the planning for events in your garden today. So let's go ahead and get into that before we get to answering more questions. Because we often have the garden for ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that. I love gardening by myself in my garden and soaking in all that good gardening energy. And I'm sure you have the similar thoughts. That's why we do it. But have you thought much about gardening for others, and gardening for a group, and gardening for a special occasion? And so when you look at the backdrop today, this is actually a picture from about 11 years ago. And this is a picture of my landscape at the house we had back then, and my daughter Curie's wedding. And we had the wedding at our house. And she and I had talked about this for months ahead, so it gave me a little bit of time to prepare. But because I had the garden and the flowers and the space, she wanted to have her wedding at my house. Wow, I didn't think my house was ready for a wedding. And so this was a spot we chose. And so this area of trees, this little copse of aspen trees, didn't look like this when I started preparing. And that's the whole point. That's why I wanted to talk about it today, is with preparation and with the idea that you can use your garden for a special occasion. It doesn't have to be a wedding. It could be a birthday party. It could be an anniversary party. It can be just a get together with friends. You can have your garden as the showcase location for whatever the event happens to be. And with Curie's wedding, I had to do a lot of cutting down of trees, of pruning the trees, and we planned the time of day so that there was shade cast by the trees at the front of the ceremony so that they could exchange their vows in the shade of the tree. And while you can't really see it, I had 2 rose bushes that I planted right behind where they were going to take their vows. And so a little bit of symbolism with the roses representing each of them as they were taking their vows. If you look over here, you can see the peacock that I still have in my garden. But throughout this whole space, I had a lot of low-lying flowers. I tried to time the bloom of the flowers with the time of the wedding. And the wedding was in late July, about 11 years ago. And so it took a lot of effort, a lot of planning to put together a space for a special event like a wedding. And so I just wanted to throw that out at you today. And I hope you'll share some ideas and share some of your experiences where you've used the garden. And I want to also give a shout out because I got this idea from watching a video. I've discovered a channel. It's a new channel for me, though they've been around for a couple years, but or more than a couple years. But a shout out to The Kitchen Garden with Eli and Kate. And they're in Scotland. Wonderful, wonderful videos. But one of the videos I was watching this week, she commented that they had their wedding in their garden area. And that's what prompted me to think, oh, wow, I had my daughter's wedding in my garden area. And I've been to many events at friends' houses in their garden. And so when you plan your garden, if you plan a space for chairs or benches, or like this one, a space with shade, you can start hosting more and more events. And now this whole area where we had all the chairs for the wedding was really rough ground. The grass wasn't that great. So I spent time bringing in some good soil, leveling the area, really paying particular attention to the grass, pulling out all the weeds, and it ended up being a wonderful space. And it was one of those things where everybody was focused on the wedding. Everybody was focused on the wedding couple. And they weren't thinking about uneven ground. They weren't thinking about how terrible things looked. And that's one of the issues when you start thinking about using your garden for special occasions. If you do everything right, the focus will be on whatever the event is, because the space just feels so good with the flowers and the trees and the bushes and whatever else you have, that now the focus becomes the food or the people or the drink or the occasion itself. So I'll throw out little more tidbits of that as we proceed, but that's the idea for today. And if you look, that's me right there walking my daughter down the aisle, and that's Kiri right there looking beautiful as she goes to marry Bryson right there. There's my son Kale. Kale was actually Kiri's bridesmaid. They're a close brother and sister, and that's what they did. It was fun, and made it a unique wedding. So there you go. Okay. Eilish says, I subscribe to them. They are amazing. So again, shout out to the Kitchen Garden with Eli and Kate. I put a link to their channel in the description today in this live stream. And so I encourage that you check them out and go ahead and say that I sent you, because they're a smaller channel. I think they're smaller than they deserve to be. They deserve to be a much bigger channel. So I encourage that you check them out. Let them know that you're part of the Gardener Scott community, and that's awesome. But yeah, that is an awesome channel that they are putting out some really, really good videos, and I'll talk a little bit about more. Green Love, hi to you. I'm so glad you're here to catch us live as well. Always nice to be great, or nice to be here and with you all as well, Green Love. So it's nice to see you here today. Don Faith is saying, your advice is great, but the problem for me is our temperatures here in UK and growing season aren't as high, and length aren't as favorable as yours. And so I agree with you. But some of the issues that we have with that heat is the problem with the heat. It's hard to keep some of the plants growing. It's hard to keep the flowers blooming. It's hard to, especially in my region, keep things watered because we just don't have the water. And yes, we all have our own individual challenges. And when you can meet those challenges, there's certainly something you can do. Now, the Kitchen Garden with Eli and Kate, they're in Scotland. And so I'm in Colorado, very dry conditions, very hot conditions. They had their wedding in their garden in a much cooler environment in the UK. So it's one of those things with planning and with preparation and with the considerations that you have within your particular space, you can definitely do it. And so the temperatures in the UK may be different. Your growing season is actually longer than my growing season throughout most of the UK. I've only have 134 to 135 day typically the length of my growing season. And so it's hot here, but it's also very cold during the winter. And so use that to your advantage as you choose the plants and get your gardens growing. Identify the limitations you have in your garden, but also the advantages you have in your garden. There's a lot that's grown in the UK that I just can't grow here because it's too dry and the season is too short. Okay, Sheena's Keto Prepared Homestead. Good morning to you. Patricia Simmon, hello. Rain and lightning in Kentucky. We had our third wettest July on record this year. We had a lot of rain, a lot of lightning. Luckily, no hail this year. So I hope the rain is adding to your garden. Ultimate Gardening, nice to see you here today as well. It's always nice to see everybody checking in. Always nice to have everything growing well. Dwayne is asking, have you successfully grown Japanese eggplant? I grow, but I can't grow it well. I'm in Alberta. and that may be part of the issue. I've had some issues with eggplant. I'm actually doing pretty well with my eggplant this year, but the issue I've had has been with the length of the growing season. And so what I did this year that was a little bit different than what I've done in the past was to start my eggplant earlier. And so in the past, I always grew eggplant from seed and then wonder outside, direct sow, and then wondered why it didn't grow well. And a couple years, I started it from seed indoors about 3 or 4 weeks later, or earlier than the last frost date, and it still didn't do well. This year, I started my eggplant about 10 weeks. I think it ended up being about 8 to 10 weeks before I put them outside, and they're doing great. I've got fruit that's forming on them right now, which I've never had before. So consider that. Consider starting the eggplant indoors, especially in Alberta with a shorter season as well, and see if maybe that will give you some of the success that you're hoping for. Green Love saying bone dry in California. Yeah, the drought this year in California, the fires in California. It is so smoky here in Colorado. Yesterday, we actually had a health advisory for healthy people because the smoke is so bad. Our air quality index is terrible right now. This morning, I went out to water the garden a little bit, my seed bed in particular. I couldn't see the mountains. It is so smoky. Rocky Mountains are huge chunks of granite soaring into the sky. Couldn't see them today at all because of the smoke. So between the dry conditions and the smoke, I feel your pain, Green Love. I hope it changes soon. It's just been a terrible situation over there. Melissa says, hence our wildfire season every year. And so I'll mention briefly this whole area back here. This is in the Black Forest area outside Colorado Springs. And shortly after this picture, I'm trying to remember just exactly when the fire hit, we had a wildfire roll through this area. And so the area back over here behind me is the road into the area. And we were evacuated for 11 days, and the fire came right up to the road that leads to our house. Off to this other side over here, across the field, this house was okay, but the house that you can't see just off screen was burned to the ground, and a couple others were burned to the ground. So we were very lucky during that fire. Over 500 houses were lost in this area that I lived in. And the fire roared up to us and around us. So we didn't lose our house or our property, but it was a very scary time. So I've lived through it, and I definitely feel the pain of everyone, but particularly those in California now who are having to deal with the second largest fire in the state's history. It's just incredible. And that smoke is blowing across the country, and it's affecting us even here over 1,000 miles away in Colorado, where we can't see the mountains because the smoke is so intense. So I hope it improves quickly. Let's see. So Raphaelia is asking, anyone have problem with borage turning yellow? I gave it iron tone, but not helping. So depending on the age of the plant, borage doesn't last that long, but it's normal for the lower branches to turn yellow as the plant ages. In fact, my borage right now, that's about 2 feet tall, I think. The flowers have already started to fade, and those lower leaves are starting to turn yellow. That's normal. If the whole plant is turning yellow, it's more likely that it becomes a water issue. Overwatering or underwatering will tend to make most of the leaves yellow, or a lot of the leaves yellow. The iron chlorosis, which is caused by an iron deficiency, is a little bit different, where the veins of the leaves, you'll see a distinct difference. You'll have dark green and yellow. And so when the veins really stand out as a completely different color than the leaves, that's usually a sign of iron chlorosis, which is caused by an iron deficiency. But if the whole leaf is yellow, it's usually a watering issue or a root issue of some type. And so I would start looking there to see if that might be a way that you can trace to see what's causing the leaves to start turning yellow. Green Love says, Black-Eyed Susan's been the star of my pollinator garden this year. Last year was Borage. Excellent. Both plants I grow, Black-Eyed Susan is a biennial plant. Typically when you grow it, you won't get flowers till the second season. And so I put in a whole bunch of Rudbeckia, Black-Eyed Susan, and I'm looking forward to all my flowers next year. So glad you've had some good success with that. Hello, Jay. I always have to give a shout out to Jay and Heidi, the moderators, who do such a wonderful job. And Jay's in Canada. Canadians are experiencing widespread flowers from British Columbia and Northern Ontario. A friend in Northern BC has had to evacuate her entire farm and animals. That's hard. So again, best wishes to everyone out there who's having to deal with the fires. It's so terrible, and we're seeing more and more of them. And hopefully, we'll see some changes, but it doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon. Rachel says, my borage gave up the ghost last week and is now nurturing my compost. And there you have it. Borage is, will do well for a long period of time, and then at some point fades, and you can eat it. It is one of those edible plants, but yeah, definitely compost is one of those things that put your plants in compost. Christy, hello to you. I'm in the Portland, Oregon area. I have a daughter in the Portland, Oregon area. About to start our third heat wave of 100+ days. Shade cloth is a saving grace. And so, yeah, Portland has just been so crazy this year. We've been hearing the reports of how hot it's been, triple-digit days over and over. Never happened before. Record-setting temperatures in Portland. But shade cloth. Shade cloth is just one of those things that I've used more shade cloth this year than I think I've ever used before. And like I said, I use it for a lot of different things. So we think in terms of using shade cloth for the high temperatures, but also use it for the things like protecting your seedlings in the heat as well, if you want a fall garden and want to keep plants growing. But definitely it's a saving grace when the heat gets that hot, because if you're hot, your plants are hot, and they don't sweat like we do to cool themselves down. They have their transpiration process, but then that shuts down because they don't want to lose all the moisture in the plant, and then that causes them to wilt. And then if it doesn't cool soon enough, the wilt can lead to cellular damage, and the cellular damage can lead to a plant that either dies or you won't get the flowers and fruit that you're looking for. And shade cloth can definitely make a difference for that. And so Dwayne's asking, can you grow gourds in cooler climates? Yes, you can. Same issue. So I've had good success with birdhouse gourds and loofah gourds that I've grown here in Colorado. And again, very short growing season. And the key is starting them early so that you're putting plants in the ground rather than sowing from seed. And even with doing that, doesn't always work every year. So I think I've tried loofah gourds 3 times. One year I had an incredible harvest. One year I had a few of the gourds that I harvested. And then the third year I got nothing because the first freeze in fall just came too soon. And so a lot of it depends on the localized weather that you have and how early your first frost date is. I've had better success with birdhouse gourds, which tend to grow a little bit faster. And so I think I've grown birdhouse gourds 3 or 4 times. And all but one of those years, I was able to get some birdhouse gourds. So yes, you can do it. Start early, pick a nice sunny spot. Be ready with some protection, maybe throwing some plastic over them if you have an early frost. But I don't see there's any reason why you can't grow them in a cooler climate. You just have to make a little extra effort. It takes a little bit of extra work to make that happen. Linda says, I've never used shade cloth. We'll probably need to get some for next week of 100 plus in Western Oregon. Yeah, get it. And I've found, it used to be shade cloth was one of those things that was hard to find, but most of the nurseries that I've gone into recently have shade cloth for sale, big rolls, and you can buy it by the foot or by the yard. And so check out your local nursery and see if maybe they're selling shade cloth. That could be an easy source. And then there's a bunch of places you can find it online. Okay, always nice to see you all here today. One of the other things I wanted to talk about when we're talking about the special occasion in the garden, I referenced a group, friends, or like in this case, having a wedding. But you can also think in terms of doing it just for yourself. And so I mentioned this a while back in one of the live streams at the last house where we planted a tree. And when we planted that tree, we spread some of the ashes of my wife's mother and my wife's father in the soil when we planted the tree. And so that tree now became a special place in the garden. And part of the intent was that would be a place we would go to during the times that we wanted to remember her mother and father. And so you can look at the special occasion from that perspective. If there's a death or a birth or a marriage, but a date that you want to remember in your garden, well, then create a space for that. And that space could be as simple as just a bench underneath a tree, and the tree has some significance to it. Or the bench has some significance to it. And so you'll see this if you walk through city parks or botanic gardens. You'll often see benches with little plaques that are in the memory of somebody. And so these memoriam benches, I think we can also do in our garden. And I do this every year on my father's birthday. I'll go outside in my garden and I'll toast my father. He's no longer with us, and that's the date I choose to remember him. And so this is one of those things where you can set up a space for a special occasion like that. If you toast a lost one, a lost loving person from your family, then build a place in your garden so that that's now the spot that you have that remembrance. And so you can see these ideas can just overflow as you create a garden space and as you plan your garden out for special events, special occasions, special memories. So there's another one that I wanted to talk to you and share with you, because as I build out more of my garden, I will be creating more of those kind of spaces so that we can have small groups and big groups and not just me enjoying the garden space. Okay, let's see. Christine says, hi from Australia. Hi to you, Christine Dawson. 1:36 a.m. I don't have a big space for gardening, but I love listening to what others are doing. That's awesome. Thanks for being with us at 1:36 in the morning. You don't need a big space for some of these things that I'm talking about today. Just a little space can be enough. And so the pots that you have, for instance, if there's a flower, there's a lot of flowers, Johnny jump ups, for instance. We talked about that a few weeks ago, the violas. That was one of my grandmother's favorite flowers. And my grandmother's no longer with us. But that's what I grow as a ground cover in some areas of my garden. And so the concrete bench that I have in my garden, I have surrounded by those plants. And that's a space that when I sit in that space, I often think of my grandmother. And it's just a small space. It's just a bench and some flowers surrounding it. But it's a remembrance location. And so you don't have to think big like a wedding. You can think small about just you and somebody else or another a couple or whatever it happens to be. The last house I did, I built a wonderful garden space with a patio and a pergola, and it was designed with just a nice little table out there that sat 6 people. And it was designed to entertain friends outside in the garden. And so that's what I wanted to throw at you today. Those kind of ideas. Think about those kind of things. If you like to entertain, if you have a small or large group of friends that you meet regularly, well, if you normally do it inside the house, now start thinking about what can you do outside the house get-togethers. And same people, same activities, but now you can do it in your garden as opposed to in your dining room. So there's all kinds of wonderful things you can do. Celeste says, by the way, I ordered my garlic this week. Good for you. There were several varieties sold out. It's that time already. Good point. I think we talked about this just about a year ago. It's getting close to garlic planting time for most of us. Here in my Colorado garden, it's late September, early October is time to start putting the garlic in the ground. And you're exactly right, Celeste. Now's the time to start getting your garlic. Because like many of us experienced early in the year when we were trying to buy seeds and everything was sold out, you're going to have the same kind of issues with garlic right now. So get your garlic. And I have a couple videos on garlic. I've got one video where we do a garlic taste test. And so if you're wondering about varieties to grow, I would suggest look at some of my videos because I do have some suggestions. Music is my highest recommended garlic. I've had great success with music. I think everybody I know that's grown music has had good success with it. I don't know that I've ever had anyone that did not have good results with music. So if you have grown music and you like it, go ahead and let us know in the comments. But if you've grown music and had problems with us, let us know as well, because I don't think anyone's had problems with it, or if it was minimal. But thanks for that prompt, Celeste, because that's definitely something we need to keep in mind. Get your garlic ordered so you can get it in the ground at the time that's appropriate for you. And that's one of the nice things about garlic is you can get it now in July and not put it in the ground until October, and the cloves will still be fine. Leave it as a bulb until you get ready to put it in the ground, and then you can break apart the bulb into those individual cloves and plant the garlic and be ready to go. But yeah, definitely get it now. Hello, Colorado Bird Nerd. Thank you so much for that contribution. I look forward to Monday mornings to learn from you, getting ready to take the CSU certified Colorado Gardener course. Awesome. And so we started talking about Lar taking the Master Gardener class here in Colorado, and I'm not sure if they do this throughout the United States or in Canada, but there is an option here in Colorado to go through the Colorado Gardener course, which is essentially the same course as the Master Gardener course. The difference is here in Colorado, the Master Gardener course requires you to do some volunteering, quite a few hours of community outreach at the help desk or answering phones or all the other activities that Master Gardeners do. But you can get the same information and the same education by going through the certified Colorado Gardener course. So good for you, Colorado Bird Nerd. I know that you'll learn lots and be able to move forward. And like I talked about in the beginning, that one of the advantages to a course like that is just realizing how much you don't know. And so it prompts you to learn more. It really is a catalyst for becoming a master gardener. And I've talked about this before in a few videos. Whether you have the designation of master gardener or not does not mean you aren't a master at gardening. It just so happens those of us that were certified master gardeners went through a course and did a lot of volunteer activity and then got a certificate that said we were master gardeners. But I know so much more now than I knew then, because that was the biggest thing I got out of that program. Is it instilled in me how to research the botany, the horticulture, all those aspects of gardening so that I could learn more and become better. You don't have to go through a course to master whatever part of gardening you like, but doing a formal course really helps get you on the right track of research and understanding how to find good information as opposed to bad information when it comes to gardening. So I wish you the best. Look forward to hearing more from you about the results of your course. That's always fun, and it's always nice to encounter people that are going through a program like that. Brian Siebert says, second year ever-bearing strawberries producing runners like crazy, but no fruit. Other plants are already offering second crop of fruit. Should I pull the unproductive plants? It might depend a little bit on the variety. I have that same issue. My Cavendish is supposed to be an ever-bearing variety, and it's sending out a whole bunch of runners and not getting any fruit, and this is its second year. Whereas my Quinault, which I love, I'm already getting a second crop on. So I'm not convinced that the Cavendish strawberries that I have are really best for the heat that I've had. And that's always a big issue. If it's too hot, you won't get the flowers and the fruit. And we've had some really hot conditions here in Colorado. So that may be part of the issue. What I would suggest, though, rather than pulling the plants and starting over again, is allowing some of those plants, the runners, root the runners either in the bed or in a separate little pot. And then once those runners have rooted, now you've got next season's plants. And yes, you can go ahead and pull up the unproductive plants because they might not give you a good crop this year. Most strawberry varieties only last about 3 years. You should get a small crop in the first year, a pretty good crop the second year, and then a lighter crop in the third year. So you could leave those plants in place and hope for a crop next year, though it won't be as large. Or plant a whole new variety that you know will do better. It might just be that particular variety. And so that's what I'm doing with my Cavendish, is I'm allowing those runners to root, and that's what I'll be planting for next year. Now, once those runners have sat, if there's a whole bunch of runners and some of those runners have rooted, you will see a noticeable difference or decrease in the flower and the fruiting of that original mother plant. So that could be part of the issue. If you want more flowers and more strawberry, you should be pruning and cutting off the runners as often as possible. So when a plant sends out 20 runners, it's not going to be devoting any energy to the strawberries because it's putting all of its energy into the runners. So there is a balance there. That could also be part of the issue, is you just let too many runners grow. And so the fruit got out of strawberry mode and started getting into plant propagation mode. Either way, it's completely up to you. You might leave some, pull some, let some root, mix it up a little bit, and this is another one of those ways to become a master at gardening. It's just to try a few different methods in your own garden and then see what you have the best results with next year. You do have to have patience to see some of that, but that's definitely something to think about. Thriving in Amber, thanks so much. Just make sure what you learn supports your garden and not the supplier spreading myths. That's exactly right. There's a lot of bad information out there, and that's why I say that's one of the things I really appreciate from the Master Gardener program, is the ability to do some research and to recognize when the myths are out there happening. Okay, let's see what else we have popping up. It's nice to see all the interaction going back and forth. Natasha's saying hello to you, Natasha. I just bought a metal raised bed set and plan to fill them using a Hügelkultur method. Do you think they'll be ready to plant in by next spring? My last frost is around May 1st. They should be. And so the Hügelkultur method is where you bury logs and branches and twigs and sticks and leaves and grass and just a lot of organic matter, and then use that as the foundation for a bed. Now, the way I do my raised beds, and I've got a couple videos that showed this, I'll put all those logs and twigs and branches and everything else in the lower half of the bed. But in the upper half, I'm using amended soil. And so all of my plants have at least 8 inches. Most often it's 12 to 18 inches above those decaying logs. And so when I do that, yes, that's exactly what I do. I like to start that in autumn, give the winter for that whole process to start developing, and then I can plant in it in spring. If you don't have that much soil on top, if you just have logs that are covered with 4 to 6 inches of soil, you be okay with some shallow rooted plants the next spring, but you won't be able to grow the deep rooted plants because you just won't have the decay fast enough. It's going to take years for logs and big branches to break down when buried in soil. And so if you're creating a space that you're not planning on using for years, you can cover a big pile of logs with a light layer of soil. It will decompose, enrich the soil, and you can plant in it. But for planting the next year, do make sure you've got enough soil for the roots of the plants that you're going to be growing. And if you're growing deep-rooted plants, you'll need more soil. In the end, after this amount of time, all that decaying matter will enrich the soil, and then you have the earthworms that move in and help move all those nutrients through the soil, and then you have the beetles and everything else that help with that process, in addition to the bacteria and the fungi. It all works together, but it doesn't happen overnight. So with the intent of planting next spring, I would say just make sure that the lower half is the Hügelkultur and the top half is closer to a regular bed, and you should be fine in planting without too much issue. Okay, let's see. Yeah, Nick from Yuma says, I almost took out the strawberries after a year, and then they started popping up fruit. And that's what I'm kind of hoping with my Cavendish is when the temperatures cool, that I'll start seeing a late crop in my strawberries. That's what I'm hoping for. So we'll see what happens with their, yeah, Frank Barnwell raises a good point as well. I've worked with 2 master gardeners, but they didn't seem too savvy on building soil quality. And so that's why I mentioned the Master Gardener program is a broad-based education. And so I think we got about 3 hours of instruction on soil, what soil is and what soil is used for, how plants grow in soil. That's it. And so this course was more than 4 months long, and it only had 3 hours of education on soil and what soil is. And then there was another 3 hours on amending with things like compost and organic matter and how that could enrich the soil. So a total of 6 hours. And there were breaks in there, and there were questions and discussion in there. So really, the total instruction I got in the Master Gardener program on soil were just a couple hours, not much at all. But since then, I've learned a lot more about soil by reading books like Teeming with Microbes, which is one of my highly recommended books where you can learn about soil, and actually doing it and seeing the results of the soil. So yes, you're exactly right, Frank. Just because someone is a master gardener does not mean they're an expert in anything. Instead, it's just a starting point to become an expert. I know master gardeners, I've said this before too, I know master gardeners who are experts with, let's choose, for an example, irises. I know some master gardeners with our local iris society that grow irises better than anybody. They're experts in growing irises. They're not experts in any other gardening area. They've got good information and good experience in other areas, but they're not experts. A friend of mine is an expert growing perennial flowers, and she knows everything about these flowers, their botanical names, everything about the flowers. But she struggles to grow a vegetable garden because she has become an expert on flowers and just a knowledgeable gardener in the vegetable garden. And so it is unusual to find a master gardener that has a widespread knowledge across the gardening spectrum. And I'll touch a little bit about that in a little bit when we get to the philosophy phase. But the idea being, you got to learn more. If you go to a class, that class should prompt you to learn more. If you become a master gardener, that should prompt you to learn more. And I've worked with a lot of master gardeners before that rested on their laurels. I'm a master gardener. Well, they were some of the dumbest gardeners I've ever encountered, because they took those few hours of instruction and thought that's all they needed to know, and they were completely wrong. That's not the way to approach gardening. So you don't have to go through a formal course of instruction if you just take that basic mindset of always learning more and recognizing what you don't know as you learn more through the process. Hey, I see Tony here today. I always like to say hi to Tony at Simplify Gardening. Let's see if I can see where he checked in. I see some comments to Tony. Need to continue. I'm here but can't type. So you're not the only one. So always nice to see Tony on the Simplified Gardening channel. And so I mentioned the channel that I've watched a lot of this week, The Kitchen Garden with Eli and Kate. And I wanted to also mention this. So I'm actually glad Tony's here today, because I was going to give a shout out. This is one of those things that I always encourage you, like we're talking about, to seek new information and to seek new knowledge. And don't be tied into where you happen to be. Eli and Kate are in Scotland. Tony is in Wales. I've also had Scott Head on the channel and here on the live stream. He's in Texas. I'm in Colorado. Those 4 locations are completely different. But we all have gardening channels where we're throwing out information for you to glean the most important information you can. So always nice to have you here, Tony. Always nice to watch your videos. And even if you're having trouble typing today, it's always nice to have you here. Okay. Patchy the Pirate and Potty the Pirate say ahoy there. Ahoy to you, parrots. How much water a day does it take for vegetable plants to grow out of the ground? Because I love to plant. So to get the plants growing out of the ground, so if you start with a seed and then allow that seed to germinate and then start growing, it takes a lot of watering. And so I'm watering my new seed bed that I've already talked a couple times about today. I'm watering that bed at least 3 times a day. Now, I live in a very dry region, and today it's supposed to get up to about 95. That's 35 Celsius. I watered before I started this live stream. I will go outside again here in about another hour or so, water that bed again. I will also water that bed during the peak of the day when things are drying out the fastest. And then I'll water that bed again close to sunset. So I'm actually, because today is so hot and dry in my garden, I'm going to be watering that new seed bed 4 times to try to keep the soil moist so that those seeds will germinate. This last week wasn't as hot, so I was doing it 3 times a day. A lot of it depends on your area. Even on the days when we had rain last week, I still watered the bed because the rain was not enough. We got some light rain, but when you are watering your garden, don't assume that the natural rain is enough for your plants. And so I used the rain we were getting as one of those waterings. But there was a day last week when we had an early rain, and I still watered twice that day, that seed bed, because the soil was drying out so quickly. So a lot of it depends. You have to check your soil, and you just want to try to keep it evenly moist while those seeds are germinating so that they'll grow out of the ground. Once they're out of the ground, you can mulch more thickly, and you shouldn't need to water as often. So I water the bulk of my garden, I water my vegetable garden every day. I water my fruit bushes and asparagus about every 3 days. And I water my fruit trees about every 4 or 5 days. So a lot of it depends on the plant that you're growing and how much water they need. But particularly for the young seedlings, a couple times a day is definitely something you should build into your schedule. And you'll probably have better success when you do that. Always nice. Okay. Bettina's asking if the chat is frozen. I don't know that it is. I was scrolling up, so we'll see if we get more questions popping up, but hopefully we don't have anything that's frozen. So I'll go back and see if we've got some other questions. Yeah, Jay is always so good. There's a link that Jay has posted to the kitchen garden with Eli and Kate. And I do encourage that you check them out because I've really, really been pleased with what they're doing on that channel. I think it's one of those things where they take the time and energy to give out good information. It's just a backyard garden in Scotland, but it's really some good information that they're presenting. So thanks for putting that link out there. It's always nice to see it. Rachel's saying, it took some time, but I'm supplementing my groceries by 1 or 2 items for the year and 5 to 8 items during the season. I currently buy no thyme, parsley, basil at all. Good for you, Rachel. I love that idea. And that's the approach I take as well. This week was a wonderful week. I started harvesting my zucchini, my aubergine, I think is what you call it in the UK. And it's doing great. I've made some zucchini bread and I've made some pickled zucchini. I've had some zucchini sauteed in olive oil, butter, and onions. I've had some grilled zucchini. And sure, I'll probably be getting tired of zucchini here pretty soon. But a month ago, I was doing much of that, particularly the grilled and the sauteed zucchini, with the store-bought. And I don't have to do that now. So if you can supplement your diet, your menu from the garden, that's such a wonderful way to do it. So I'm so glad to do that. I haven't bought thyme. Oh, it's been years. I can't remember the last time I bought thyme as an herb in the store. I'm trying hard. It's been at least 20 years. It's been at least 20 years since I've bought thyme or rosemary or sage or tarragon, those primary herbs that I'm growing every year and growing. It's been years and years since I've done that. I haven't bought mint, fresh mint or fresh basil in years as well, because I grow it. And I've got a ton of basil right now. And again, it's one of those things I just can't use it fast enough. But that's a great way to garden. The rest of you out there, go ahead and share some of your ideas about that, because it's one of those things that it's just such a great way not only to enjoy gardening, but to supplement your kitchen with the things you can grow, and especially the herbs that you're growing. Dry them and save them, and you'll never have to buy them again. I've got so much thyme this year that I'm going to be giving it away in bottles as gifts come holiday time. So good for you. Okay, I see a couple people. Heidi is saying, and Jay is saying that Eli and Kate is here now. So so good to have you on. And if you haven't watched us from the beginning, Eli and or Kate, be sure to watch from the beginning again. There they are. Thank you guys, but it's okay. Live chats are hard work. Scott's busy answering folks, which is way more important than saying hi to you. No, saying hi to you is important. I hope you stay through the end, because I'm going to bring you up again as I get to the philosophy phase here in a little bit. But I've just really fallen in love with your channel. I really do like what you're doing and some of the information that you're passing out. So glad you can join us. And so to have Eli and Kate here with us, and have Tony from Simplified Gardening, to have all of you here today. This truly is a global gardening audience. That's what I love so much about these live streams on Monday, is we've got everybody from around the world. And even if we're doing things completely differently in our gardens, we can still share our stories and our questions and our answers and all the rest of that. Hey, Melissa, I like that idea. Holiday time. That's actually pretty good. I think I might put that on my bottles when I give away that time over the holidays. That's creative. I really like that. Frank, I feel for you. Peppermint got loose from someone. Planting a packet last year, part of the lawn now. Yeah, there's so many of those plants that are so nice. And if you let it get loose, it just can take over an area. I've had to fight raspberry and horseradish in previous gardens that started in a nice controlled area and then escaped and started taking over. I've really worked hard over the years to avoid that happening with mint, and knock on wood, I've been lucky so far. So good luck with that. That is one of those situations, particularly in a lawn, where you might start looking at some broadleaf corrective actions to include an herbicide. And I don't normally advocate herbicides, but particularly in a lawn, if you have a plant that escapes from your garden, it might be the only way to deal with it. So from there, we'll get to see what is going on. So, well, thanks so much from Eli and Kate. Fans of me as well. Don't normally get to join live, so today's a treat. Good, I'm so glad. I always like to be a treat. All of us like to be a treat to somebody at some point. Shandy's Garden says, the person I saw on YouTube do it, just cut off the runners and put them right in the soil. I probably should have done that in water. And so I'm not sure exactly what that was in reference with, but there's a lot of things that you can do that with. If you're talking about mint in particular, yeah, you can propagate mint from putting it in water. If you're talking about strawberries, that's a little more difficult, but that can be done. It takes a lot of effort, but those are a couple of plants we talked about today, if that's what you're referencing. Rita, thanks so much for that. I love this live chat. Set an alarm so I won't miss it. I luckily don't have to set an alarm myself. I still wake up quite early, but on these days, I typically wake up earlier because as soon as my brain wakes up, I'm thinking about all the preparation. Did I forget to do this? Did I forget to do that? Because I plan the topics and I plan the things I want to say, and especially the philosophy phase at the end. I want to make sure that I convey exactly what I want to convey. So my own brain is an alarm on Mondays, and I'm thinking about this for hours ahead. But I'm so glad there are so many of you, and like we talked about in Australia, so many of you that are staying up late to be able to watch this. This is so incredible that you all share your time during Mondays so that we can have a lot of this. Lenora is saying, I'm having rat issues like no other. Can you recommend anything? I'm reducing habitat. Live rat traps don't work. They dig holes in my garden beds. Habitat is a huge issue. The thing that I've had most success with accidentally with my voles and my gophers and my mice in my garden have been cats, neighborhood cats that have come through. And so I don't have cats of my own, but if you're a cat person, you might consider having an outdoor cat. That can definitely make a difference. And I've heard from a lot of people after we talked about this in a live stream in recent weeks who say that was their biggest success, was having a cat in the garden take care of the rats. Trapping is something I would say keep doing. Again, like we started the show with, if you can find their nest, if you can find their habitat and disrupt that, you can help decrease the population, or at least hopefully the population won't increase. But predators are important, to include owls and hawks. And so I encourage those birds as well. And I haven't seen our owl lately. I saw the hawks in a recent day. But if you have big trees, allow those big trees to continue growing and get bigger, because a lot of those predatory birds will attack from a big tree. If you don't have a big tree, plant a big tree. That'll take a long time to correct the action, but same type of thing. Give those birds some place to roost so that they can attack. But but trapping and predators are really the best non-chemical way to deal with all of those kind of pests. And so I hope you can have some good success if you attempt to do that. And then, of course, I do not advocate poisoning animals in the garden, just because if you have a nice balanced environment, then that animal is going to become food for another animal. And so by attempting to poison one, you could end up poisoning another. So let's hope you can encourage some of those predators, and let's hope some of those traps work, and you can take away some of the areas that they live in. And then I did this beginning of the year. If you look at some of my videos where I show the row cover, the woven fabric that I had over my raised beds, that can be effective against mice and rats as well. A raised bed with hoops with a tight fitting cover over the hoops so that the rats can't even get into the beds. That's another option. So if you're not doing raised beds, this might be a reason to do raised beds. And if you are doing raised beds, cover the whole thing so that they can't get into the bed in the first place. It's extra effort because you have to pull back the cover when you tend to those plants, but that can keep those pests from eating those plants or digging up your garden. Okay, let's see. James is saying we have a stray cat in the neighborhood, but she loves leaves the squirrels alone and only messes with the birds and makes my dog bark at 3 a.m. Yeah, I had a cat like that at my last house. Ended up annoying the dogs more than taking care of the mice. But they are feeding at that hour, so maybe they're doing some stuff in your garden that they can take care of it. Linda says, I have mice and voles, but no cats. There are lots of trees. I'm wondering if I should look into owl houses. Yeah, an owl house is an option. I've talked about doing bat houses before. I am planning a bat house in my yard, and I talked about that with the mosquitoes earlier. But yeah, that's exactly it. I build bird houses for lots of different types of birds. You can, depending on what type of owls you have in your area, you can build a house that would encourage owls to come in. And if you've got owls in your garden, they're looking for food at night as well. And that's when a lot of these mice and voles and rats come out. So always a good option. Raphaelia said, I just borrowed cat litter from my friend and I'm putting it around to repel mice. I talked about this. I did a little bit of research on this. I haven't seen anything official, university studies, which is where it gets back to that master gardener training where I'm always looking for university research. But anecdotally, I've heard that. And so I actually planned on doing that this year. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law offered up a bunch of their kitty litter, and I was going to do that. And then the neighborhood cat showed up and took care of the problem. So I haven't actually tried that, but I have seen anecdotally that can work, that you can put the kitty litter, the used kitty litter that the cats have already used, put that throughout your garden, and that might discourage some of those pests. The problem is a mouse or a rat or a vole, they don't necessarily know what that smell is. They don't necessarily know that that's the smell of a cat and that the cat is a predator naturally. It's an unusual smell. It might get them thinking twice, but until they've actually encountered a cat and understand that the cat is a predator, that's some of what I've read that says it might not work, because they have to be able to correlate that smell with a cat and that the cat is a predator. And until they have that correlation, it's just a new smell. And they'll get used to it, and it doesn't have much effect after a week or two. But it's worth a try, and it will break down over time. And so it is something to think about as an effort or something you can do. So there's Tony again. Now he can type. So that's good, Tony. Thanks for letting us know. And yes, your spelling is much better than it used to be. I have that same issue, especially if you're sending a text or a message and you allow autocorrect to set in, message doesn't always come across, but my fingers also don't work as well as they should for those messages. So glad that you're at work. And Tony at Simplified Gardening is at work. I'm guessing, I forget if you have 2-day shifts or 3-day shifts, but he's at the firehouse now helping everyone in his community in Wales. So I hope you have a good shift, Tony, and look forward to seeing some more of your videos soon. Always nice. And yeah, Jay, I second that. Always great to see you here. Always nice. Yeah, Heidi, that's also a good point. Cat litter can have some bad microorganisms, so be careful about putting it around edible plants. Exactly right. And I've talked about this in reference to manures before. This is why we typically don't use dog poop and cat poop in our vegetable gardens, because there can be pathogens and there can be bad bacteria, and there can also be lots of other organisms that would be bad for us to even touch. And so do not, all right, yes, I'll say do not, though I strongly suggest you don't put kitty litter or dog poop or cat poop in an area with edible plants because of that. There's just terrible things that can happen. But around the garden in general, then you can spread the kitty litter and other things in areas away from the edible plants. So thank you, Heidi. That's a very important point to raise. There are parasites in the kitty litter that can be passed to humans, and I certainly don't want to do that. So even if you are using kitty litter, it is best to help protect yourself from some of those parasites, and just dump it in an area of the garden to help deter some of those pests if you have them, if you decide to make that kind of shift. Okay, let's see. Tony says it's a 15er tonight. So, okay, doesn't sound too long. I know you've had longer shifts than that. So always nice that you're here. Okay, let's see what else we have. We're getting close to that time where I like to talk about the philosophy, but we still have time to answer some questions. Yeah, Dust Roberts, I think we just answered that. Possible parasites in the litter. There you go. Yep. And I'm scrolling up to see. And yeah, Nick, you have an interesting point too. Depending on the size of the predators you have. So Nick from Yuma's in Arizona. I'm guessing you've got some coyotes for sure, and also probably some big bird predators out there. That is definitely a concern based on what the predators you have as to whether you can let your cats go out. I've actually been quite surprised. My neighbor has chickens that free range just on the other side of the fence, and I know my daughter has lost a lot of chickens to raccoons, believe it or not. And I'm actually surprised my neighbor hasn't lost chickens to predators. But chickens, cats, dogs, depending on the size of your animals, predators are definitely a concern. So thanks so much for that reminder, Nick. That is definitely something to think about. Anand Bogmar says, greenhouse gardening automatically cuts out so many pests. I wish I could afford one. And that is a good option. That's why I say, if you don't have a greenhouse, you can use hoops and plastic, or hoops and netting, hoops and mesh to help keep out a lot of those pests. So you can copy some of the benefits of greenhouse gardening just within a single bed. If you use the same basic concept, greenhouses close up that space so that we can grow whatever it is we want to grow in the greenhouse. And yes, it does keep out a lot of pests, but when the pests get in, it also holds in those pests. But you can copy the benefits throughout your garden by having raised beds and covers. And so I do a lot of that as well. Let's see, Connie saying, we have mice inside who eat every watermelon seed I put out to dry for next year. It's going to happen. You know, my basic philosophy when it comes to pests is to live with them and to encourage the predators. There are good years, there are bad years, and often we just have to accept that we're going to lose seeds, plants, harvests to some of those pests. You'd have to balance how much effort you want to take to get rid of those pests, or at least to control the pests the best way you can. And in some cases, I just let it go. And so I have a number of plants that are eaten by caterpillars, and that's okay, because the caterpillars become the moths and the butterflies that I like flying around. But at some point, I put the BT on the leaves, and I'm going to do that this week. I talked about the BT that I put in the water for the mosquito larvae. Well, this week I'm putting my BT for caterpillars on my tomato plants, because even though I like seeing the moths and the butterflies, they've just started eating too many of my flowers that I want to turn into fruit. And so I've got to put BT on my tomato plants to help deal with some of those caterpillars. So it doesn't have to be something you do all the time. It may be something you only have to do once or twice a year to control whatever the pest is you have. But when it's time to take action, you got to take action. And be it bacteria like Bacillus thuringiensis, or a cat or an owl or whatever, it's all part of control in the big cycle of balance that we should try to have in our garden, with the good and the bad. That's what the balance is all about. Okay, let's see. Yeah, there you go, Melissa. Wrap those seeds in cheesecloth. Simplified gardening. Nettles, great to bring in predators. Another good suggestion. Yeah, and I've got nettles this year, not only to bring in some of those beneficial insect predators, but also to use in fertilizers as well. And so that's always nice to talk about. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into, because I want, if you're still on the kitchen garden from Eli and Kate, I want to highlight you again as I move into the philosophy phase. And so today's point that I'd like you to think about, and that's one reason why I spent so much time talking about the Master Gardener program earlier and developing knowledge, is that I think humility brings an increase in knowledge. And so that's the point I want to leave you with today. And it wasn't until I, as a master gardener, recognized how little I really knew that I was able to learn so much more. And like I talked briefly about some of those master gardeners I've worked with who say, I'm a master gardener, that means I know everything, so listen to what I have to say. And they'll teach a class, or they'll answer a phone call, or whatever it is. And they'll give out good information, because that's what the Master Gardener program teaches, is to give out good information. But they might not have the best information, and they certainly don't have all of the information. And it really requires we as gardeners to have some humility and recognize that we really don't know anything about anything when it comes to gardening, because you can do everything right, and then you have some mice or rats move in and eat everything. It doesn't matter what you did right, you've just lost your whole harvest, and that is so discouraging. But now you can learn more about the pest that did that particular damage. And what really got me thinking about this week is the Kitchen Garden with Eli and Kate. And I've already said it a number of times, I really like that channel now. And here's how I discovered the channel. So first off, as many of you know, I'm in the process of building a greenhouse. And I just started putting the frame together this last week. It's a lot of work. It's a metal frame, and our days have been so hot. The metal has been hot, and I haven't been able to do as much construction as I wanted to, because I had to wear gloves to deal with the metal, but I can't wear the gloves to deal with all the little screws and nuts that are required to put the frame together. So in the process, indoors, during the heat of the day, I start doing research. I start looking at what else is out there as far as greenhouse growing is concerned. Now, I've grown in a greenhouse before. At the Galileo School Garden, I had a 42-foot dome greenhouse, 42 feet in diameter. The greenhouse was 22 feet high. We had dozens of beds, over 1,000 square feet of growing space in the greenhouse. We had a tank that I think was like 1,200 gallons of water that helped moderate the temperature within the greenhouse. I grew cucumbers that were 12 feet tall. I grew tomato plants that were 14 feet tall. We had hundreds of pounds of harvest every year from that greenhouse. I could have said, I know how to grow in a greenhouse. I'll just build my greenhouse and start growing. But no, and here's where the humility comes in. I said to myself, I don't know enough about growing in a greenhouse in a backyard. So I need to learn more. And this is how I discovered the kitchen garden with Eli and Kate, because they've got some great videos from inside their greenhouse. And it's a smaller greenhouse than I'll be growing in, but the lessons that they're sharing have been great to prompt my memory as to what is required within a greenhouse, but also to start learning some new ideas about how to grow in a small space greenhouse, because I've grown in a big space greenhouse, but the lessons and the requirements are completely different from a small space greenhouse. And that's why I wanted to talk about this week, because the channel that I'm encouraging you to check out is much smaller than mine, and that doesn't mean that they know less than it doesn't mean that they know less than I do, and therefore I shouldn't be looking at those small channels. It just means that they haven't been discovered yet. Great videos, great information, and now hopefully their channel will start growing a little bit because some of you are going to check them out. But you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a master gardener. You don't have to have a YouTube channel, and you don't have to have a big YouTube channel to have information that will be beneficial to another gardener. And here on YouTube, there are hundreds and hundreds of gardening channels, some with really good information, some with not so good information, but that's what I do in my free time, is surf and explore. And that's how I found Tony at Simplified Gardening a few years ago. Back then, his channel and my channel were about the same size, much smaller than they are now. And so it's great to see the two of us growing as well as we have. But Tony had great information, still does have great information. And I still watch Tony's videos, not because he's a big channel, but because he's got good information. And now I'm watching Eli and Kate, not because they're a small channel, but because they've got good information to share. And so once you are humble in your own gardening journey, once you recognize that you really do need to seek out some help, some advice, some information, some assistance, when you have that humility, it really allows you to gain the knowledge that you're looking for. And I have a number of gardeners I know that are great with their gardening, but they've kind of closed the door on future learning. They've reached a point with their gardening where they're satisfied, and they do the same things the same way every year. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that, because they still are gardening and they still love gardening and they're still happy with their gardening. But I discover so many new things every week, every month, every year, that it enriches my gardening journey so much that I just can't stop, that I got to keep trying these new things. And so that's why I'm encouraging you to seek out a lot of this new information. And even if you consider yourself an expert in a particular area of gardening, admit that you don't know everything and humble yourself enough to learn more. And then you can truly become more expert than you are right now. And that's one of the biggest issues I have with a lot of the Master Gardener programs. Master Gardener programs are run by master gardeners who continue a lot of the myths of the Master Gardener program. One of the biggest myths of the Master Gardener program is that once you become certified as a Master Gardener, you know everything and know more than everybody else. That's wrong. Some of the best gardeners I know are not a certified Master Gardener. And some of the worst gardeners I know are certified Master Gardeners. It's all about you and the information you gain so that your garden can become the best garden possible based on your own abilities and your own knowledge. And often it means that you just have to be humble and admit you don't know enough. So that's one reason why I'm giving such a big shout out to Eli and Kate today, because that was really a big awakening for me this week. I spend so much time trying to plan my videos and create my videos and give you the best information I possibly can as an expert, because I know you're seeking out my expert information in my videos, that when I started looking at what I don't know as far as growing in a backyard greenhouse, it just opened my eyes again. And I need this every now and then, that slap in the face that says you really don't know everything. And when it comes to greenhouses, I don't know everything. I know a lot, but I don't know everything. And I need someone like Eli to get on camera and point out to me what they're doing in their backyard and their greenhouse for me to now open my eyes and seek out new information. And so some of the channels, and I'll share with you in the days ahead, one of Tony's recent videos on simplified gardening, he highlighted his favorite channels that he's watching. And a lot of them are small channels. And so I'm going to do that same video. I'm going to wait a few months until we get closer to winter and you're spending your gardening time looking at videos. But I'm going to highlight some of these smaller channels that I've been discovering that don't have a lot of views. They don't have a lot of subscribers, but they've got some good information. And so when you're on YouTube surfing, I don't know how often you'll look at the view count on a video or the subscriber count of a channel, but I'm guilty of this. If I see 3 or 4 videos that are suggested to me, I'm more likely to click on the bigger channel. I'm more likely to click on the video that has more views. And sometimes you need to take a step back and recognize that some of these smaller channels have good information. They're just small because maybe they haven't been doing it long enough. Or maybe they're small because they just haven't been discovered yet. And so give small channels a break. Start looking at videos from smaller channels. I suspect some of you are in a habit pattern where you're watching videos from Self-Sufficient Me, and you're watching videos from Simplified Gardening, and you're watching videos from Gardener Scott, and you're watching videos from Scott Head Black Gumbo. And we get in this cycle where we're often watching videos from the same creators that we like. And one of the reasons we're big channels is because we're cranking out videos every single week. Well, give the small guy a chance. Look at some of these other videos that might pop up when you do a search. Look at some of these videos that pop up when you see the feed on your homepage, and give them a break. And the Kitchen Garden with Eli and Kate is the channel of the moment because they've taught me a lot about myself and my garden and what I'm planning to do in the future in just this last week. And it's one of those lessons that we don't plan for, but just by recognizing that you need to learn more and give yourself that little bit of humility that might have been lacking before you started your search, you're going to increase your knowledge and you are going to become a better gardener. You will become a master at gardening without necessarily having to go through a master gardener course, by just allowing yourself to soak in all the knowledge that's out there. And so I'm glad that I can help in your journey with a lot of the information that I share on Mondays and in my videos and all the other avenues that we have. So learn something this week, spread your wings a little bit on your gardening journey and try something new. Learn something more about something that you thought you already knew enough about. and you'll become a better gardener. And that's why I am here, is to help you become a better gardener. I'll see you here next Monday, same time, same channel, with lots more gardening information. And I hope you have a good week. I hope the smoke clears as soon as possible and that we can start harvesting all of our crops that we've been working so hard doing. Always good to see you. You're such a wonderful global audience. And I'll see you here next week. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.